Left on the trail. The sun burned low across the wide, empty plains, stretching shadows long and lonely over the dirt road. Dust curled into the evening air, and the prairie wind whistled through the dry grass like it carried secrets of sorrow. On that forsaken trail, a small wagon stood broken, its wheels cracked, its canvas torn, its oxen long gone. And beside it, huddled in the fading light, sat a woman and her little girl. The woman's name was Clara Bennett, a widow not by death but by desertion. Her husband, a man with too much charm and not enough backbone, had left her behind when the wagon broke, muttering excuses about finding help down the trail. He never returned. Deep down, Clara knew he never would. Her daughter, Annie, no more than 6 years old, clutched a ragged doll to her chest and leaned against her mother's side. "Mama," she whispered, her voice dry from thirst, "is Papa coming back?" Clara smoothed a hand over the girl's tangled hair, swallowing the lump in her throat. "No, baby," she said softly. "But I'm here, and I'll keep you safe." Her own words felt brittle. They hadn't eaten since yesterday, and the water barrel had tipped over when the wagon broke. The heat by day was merciless, the cold by night bit deep into the bones. She wasn't sure how much longer they could last. As the first stars began to glimmer above, Clara pulled Annie close and wrapped the thin shawl tighter around them. She prayed in silence, prayed for strength, prayed for mercy, prayed for someone, anyone, to come down that trail. Miles away, a horse's hooves drummed steady against the earth. Elias McCade, a rancher known more for his solitude than his company, rode with his hat pulled low and his eyes scanning the land out of habit. Life had taught him to expect little from people and trust even less. After losing his family to fever years ago, he'd built walls high enough no one dared to climb. But that night, something stirred in him when he spotted the broken wagon against the horizon. He slowed his horse, squinting in the fading light. A wagon left alone usually meant one of two things: trouble had already come, or it was on its way. He rode closer. That's when he saw her. A woman, thin and pale, clutching a little girl to her side. Her posture screamed both exhaustion and defiance. Even half hidden in shadow, Elias could see she was bracing herself to fight or flee. He stopped a few yards away, dismounted, and kept his voice low and steady. "Evenin', ma'am." Clara stiffened, pulling Annie tighter. Her heart thumped hard against her ribs. A stranger. A man. Out here, that could mean salvation or danger. Elias removed his hat and nodded respectfully, trying not to spook her. "Looks like you've had some trouble with your wagon." Clara swallowed, her throat raw. We were left behind." The bitterness in her voice was sharp, but Elias heard the truth beneath it, the quiet desperation of someone abandoned. His gaze flicked to the girl, who was watching him with wide, solemn eyes. She didn't look afraid, just curious, like she was trying to decide if he was real or just another disappointment. "Have you eaten?" he asked. Clara hesitated, pride warring with need. "Not since yesterday." Without another word, Elias unhooked his saddlebags and pulled out a strip of jerky and a small canteen. He crouched down, setting them within reach but not moving closer. "Take it. For the little one." Annie's eyes lit up, but she looked to her mama first. Clara searched the stranger's face. Rough-hewn, sun-browned, with a beard that needed trimming. His clothes were plain, dusty from the trail, but his eyes, steady and quiet, held no cruelty in them. At last, she nodded and took the food, breaking it in half for Annie. The little girl ate hungrily, and Clara forced herself to sip just a little water, saving most for her daughter. Elias watched in silence, giving them space. Something in his chest tightened as he saw the way the woman guarded the child with her whole body, like a lioness with her cub. When Annie's hunger eased, she curled against her mother's lap, fighting sleep. Clara stroked her hair, then lifted her gaze back to the rancher. "You've done enough," she said quietly, as if to dismiss him. "We'll manage." Elias almost turned away. That was what he usually did, help where he could, then keep riding. But tonight, his boots stayed planted. He looked at the woman and child again, at the broken wagon, at the emptiness of the trail around them. He knew the prairie as well as he knew his own heartbeat. Alone, they wouldn't last another 2 days. Something deep inside him, something he thought long buried, rose to the surface. He stepped closer, his voice low, almost a whisper carried by the wind. "No, ma'am," he said, meeting her eyes. "You won't die out here. Not while I'm still breathing." And in that moment, something shifted. For Clara, for Annie, for Elias himself. The trail had been nothing but loss and despair, but now, just maybe, it held the first spark of hope. A new home, a new beginning. The next morning broke clear and gold over the prairie, the kind of dawn that painted the sky with hope even when hope felt scarce. Clara woke stiff and cold from the hard ground. Annie curled close in her arms beneath Elias's worn trail blanket. She blinked against the rising sun and then remembered the stranger, the rancher who'd ridden up in the dark, offering food, water, and quiet reassurance when all she'd had left was despair. He was there still, crouched near a small fire, frying something in a blackened pan. The scent of sizzling bacon drifted through the air, making Clara's stomach growl despite herself. Annie stirred and sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, little one," Elias said in his steady drawl. His voice was soft, but it carried weight, like a man who didn't waste words. "Hungry?" Annie nodded, her doll still clutched in one arm. Clara hesitated, pride once again pricking at her like thorns. But then Elias held out a tin plate piled with bacon and cornbread without so much as a question, and Annie took it eagerly. Watching her daughter eat, Clara felt her defenses crumble a little more. They buried what they couldn't take from the broken wagon and packed the rest onto Elias's horse. He lifted Annie with ease into the saddle, then offered his hand to Clara. She stiffened, uncertain, but when she placed her hand in his, she noticed how warm and steady his grip was, like an anchor in storm waters. The trail stretched long, but Elias rode at an easy pace, talking little, watching much. Annie chattered now and then, pointing at prairie dogs or the circling hawks above, her childish trust quickly extending to this quiet cowboy. Clara listened, torn between gratitude and suspicion. She'd been let down before, by her husband most of all. Could she risk leaning on another man's strength? Still, when Elias finally pointed to the horizon where rolling hills met a wide stretch of grassland, her breath caught. "My place," he said simply. The McCade ranch wasn't fancy, but it was sturdy and alive with the smell of hay and horses. The barn stood square against the sky, the corral filled with a few grazing cattle. A simple cabin rested against a cluster of cottonwood trees, smoke curling from the chimney. Elias dismounted and swung Annie down with ease. She laughed for the first time in days, a sound so sweet Clara almost wept. Inside, the cabin was warm and tidy. Rough-hewn furniture filled the space, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, shelves stacked with supplies. It wasn't much, but compared to the broken wagon, it felt like a palace. "You and the little one can take the bed," Elias said, scratching the back of his neck as though unused to company. "I'll bunk in the loft." Clara opened her mouth to protest, but the words stuck. It had been so long since anyone thought of her comfort. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias only nodded. Days slipped into weeks. At first, Clara and Annie were guests, but slowly they became part of the rhythm of ranch life. Clara rose early to help with chores, scrubbing, cooking, mending what she could. Annie followed Elias around like a shadow, asking endless questions about horses, ropes, and cattle. To Clara's surprise, Elias answered with patience, his rough edges softening in the little girl's presence. And somewhere in the midst of it all, Clara began to breathe again. She would catch Elias watching them sometimes, watching her, his gaze not heavy or demanding, but thoughtful, like he was trying to piece together something broken. It unsettled her at first, but it also warmed her in ways she hadn't expected. One evening, as the sky blazed with the colors of sunset, Clara sat on the porch mending one of Annie's dresses. Elias came up the steps, dust from the day still on his boots. He leaned against the post, quiet as ever. "You've worked hard today," he said at last. Clara smiled faintly, not looking up from her stitching. "Hard work I can handle. It's being left behind I can't." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She froze, needle trembling in her hand. Elias's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't know what kind of man walks away from his wife and child. But I know this." He waited until she met his eyes. "I won't ever leave you behind." The promise hung in the air between them, simple and unadorned, but it struck deeper than any vow Clara had ever heard. She blinked back sudden tears, looking away before her heart betrayed her. Annie's laughter rang from the yard where she chased fireflies, and Clara drew strength from it. The weeks turned into months. Winter crept close, but for the first time since being abandoned on the trail, Clara wasn't afraid. Elias saw to it the barn was stocked, the pantry full, the cabin warm. He never pushed, never demanded. But he was there, always steady, always near. One snowy evening, as Clara tucked Annie into bed, the girl whispered sleepily, "Mama, can we stay here forever? I like it when Mr. Elias is with us. He feels like a papa." Clara's throat tightened. She kissed Annie's forehead, smoothing back her curls. "Sleep now, baby." But long after Annie drifted off, Clara sat by the fire, her hands trembling. When Elias came in from the cold, stomping snow from his boots, she looked up at him with wide, searching eyes. "You've given us more than I can repay," she said softly. Elias shook his head. "Don't need payment." "Then why?" she whispered. For a moment, he was silent. Then he crossed the room, crouched by her chair, and spoke low, just as he had the night he found them on the trail. "Because you and that little girl, you reminded me what it's like to have a home. To have a reason to ride back at night instead of just riding on." His eyes searched hers. "And because I've fallen for you, Clara Bennett. That's the truth of it." Her breath caught. The firelight flickered between them, warm against the cold night. Slowly, she reached out, resting her hand against his rough cheek. "I thought my heart was done with love," she whispered. "But you've shown me it still remembers how." Elias covered her hand with his own, strong and certain. "Then let me prove it. Every day. For as long as you'll have me." Clara's lips trembled into a smile, tears slipping free at last. "Then you'll never ride alone again." The next spring, the prairie bloomed green and gold. At the McCade Ranch, laughter echoed in the fields where Annie chased chickens and Clara hung laundry in the sun. Elias worked the cattle with a lighter step, his solitude finally broken. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were a family, bound not by the trail that abandoned them, but by the love that found them when hope seemed lost. And though Elias still spoke little, when he looked at Clara and her daughter, his eyes said everything. He had whispered it once on a lonely trail, and now it was a promise kept. "You won't die out here. Not while I'm still breathing."